everyone, it's Lisa from My Dreaming Soap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for dropping by. Now today we're doing another soap challenge soap. And for this month, February 2021, we're doing the kiss pour technique. Now for this challenge we had a guest teacher, Joanne Watkins, who's done this technique a number of times in soap. But the original technique stems from acrylic pouring. Now, I won't actually be submitting my soap as an entry in the challenge. That's because I'm a member of the Bubble Support Crew for the Challenge Club, where we try and give lots of help and advice to the competitors, and that includes us making the challenge technique soaps early on in the month and then putting them into the Facebook group and giving people lots of ideas and things that they can do, and perhaps identifying maybe some trickier bits and some hints and tips so we can help people along. Now I'll talk about my fragrance oil in a minute, but the reason I've chosen this one is because it gives me a good range of colours that I can use in this soap in accordance with my assessment. So for this soap I'm going to be using Purple Passion from You Make It Up and Electric Blue from You Make It Up, and then also some Golden Shimmer from Mica Mama, and then a couple of neons, Neon Pink and Neon Yellow. Both of those are from Mica Mama as well. And then finally I've got some titanium dioxide that I can use as well. Now I'm going to be playing around and mixing my colours and changing them up and all sorts of things like that today. So what I've done is I've weighed out all the amounts of colorants that I need to use in my soap, and I've pre-dispersed them with some oils from my batch recipe of my soap. So when you disperse your micas in oil, you can take some oil from your batch, or you can just use some separate lightweight oil like olive oil or something. It doesn't really matter. If you use separate oil, it will just add to your superfat. The fragrance oil I'm using is Cranberry Relish from Nature's Garden. Now I know that sounds pretty Christmassy, but it's actually quite a nice tart, fruity fragrance, which is great all year round. As you can see, this isn't the original bottle, so anything that's in plastic or clear glass I decant into a nice metal bottle to keep them in the best condition possible. And then labelling wise, I'll obviously label with the fragrance and who it's from. And then I also put a red label on if there's anything that I want to be aware of with that fragrance oil. So that could be things like acceleration or discoloration. In here you can see with this one I found that it can give me fragrance spots. So I put a little note to myself to make sure I actually blend it into my oils rather than adding it to the soap batter, and then that stops that problem happening. And then just on the back of the bottle I will have the batch number of the fragrance and any other sort of important information. So I'm just starting off my soap by mixing up a very small amount of soap. Now remember that fragrance oil, I'm going to pop it in right now because I want to put it into the oils. The good thing about this fragrance oil is it doesn't accelerate trace at all. I'm only making little tiny batches for this, so I'm going to be using my Greek frappe mixer, which is really great because it plugs in and it's nice and powerful. And I always use that for anything that's a batch of less than 200 grams of oils, because anything over that, then that's fine with my normal blender because it covers the bell of the blender properly. So once that fragrance oil's mixed in really nicely, I can just carry on making the rest of this little mini batch. The reason I'm making a small batch of soap up is if you've ever watched some acrylic art being done, it's effectively, isn't it, like a painting? It's always done on a very thin layer, typically sort of poured over a canvas or something. Now when we have soap, soap is a lot thicker. And so the way my mind was working with this technique is that I wanted to get the best designs in my soap without everything bunching up and getting all squashed and losing the design because you keep pouring more and more and more soap in and squashing the design. So I decided that what I was going to do is do a layered effect. Now we discussed this and whether it was okay within the challenge card rules, and we decided that yes, it was. The rules said your entire soap had to be made with a kiss pour technique. So as long as every single one of my layers is poured using the kiss pour technique, then it would be a perfectly valid soap. Now I know I've already said I'm not entering, but I'm just doing this as a demonstration soap for other people, so it needs to be within the guidelines. The key thing with this technique is to have the right consistency of batter. So you want it to be really fluid. If you start having a thick batter, it's not going to flow and give you those lovely, beautiful, feathery swirls. But if your batter is too thin, then it will just all merge together and muddy up, and you won't get a design either. So it's critical that you can control the trace in your batter. So I've taken my batter barely to emulsion. In fairness, it may actually not quite be at emulsion yet. But as long as it's all evenly distributed, the oils and the lye, and they're all thoroughly mixed together, and I've started to get it to emulsify, that's fine. I can divide this out into my various pots that I want. Because the last thing I want is for this to thicken up on me, and I've still got to divide it out, and then I've still got to muck around with my colours and get the colours right. And remember, I haven't worked out my colours in advance. I'm going to play around with them and see what I like as I pour these amounts out. Now, in all of that time, the reaction within these little pots will continue. So as long as you make sure that before you start to pour, you have got a light trace, then you're fine. Okay, that's the critical point. It doesn't matter if it's not a trace now. It doesn't even matter that it's not an emulsion now, as long as it's thoroughly mixed and you haven't got lots of lye in one pot and not much in the other. But you've got to be certain, have I got a trace before I start to pour? So now I'm just going to start playing around with my colours, and I know that's not something that you normally see me do. Normally I'm quite measured with how much colour I put in each individual little bit, but if you remember right at the start, I measured out all the colour that I can use for this soap according to my assessment. So as long as I stick to what's in my little pots that I've got, then that's fine. I can muck around and change my colours and mix them up however I like to get the colour schemes that I want. Okay, so let's get on with our pour, shall we? Now, the good thing we do in layers is that we get 5 goes at doing the pour because we're going to have 5 layers. So we can muck around and look at the designs and decide what we want best. And that's a good way to have some practice. Now, I am going to be pouring into these little disposable cups. I'm not a fan of using disposable anything when I soap, but these are environmentally friendly cups. They're just literally made of paper. There's none of that funny wax or anything on them, so they're not too bad. And I'm going to use them for every single pour that I do today. So first of all, I'm just going to take 2 of my colours, and I want to pour them half and half into the cups. Now, when you're doing this, try as much as you can to pour down the side of the cup. You don't want to pour the 2 streams together, because if you do, they're going to grab each other and muddy up in the middle. And we don't want to muddle anything up now, because we're going to muddle it a bit as we pour it into our mould. And then I'm just going to do exactly the same into the other cup, and that's my 4 colours poured. And then let's just grab our mould and start pouring. Now the idea of the kiss pour is that the two streams of batter, as they leave the cups, have to touch each other, i.e. they kiss each other on the way down into your soap mould. Now you want to keep a nice steady stream as you're pouring, and that can actually be quite difficult. It's surprisingly hard to sort of keep your hands level. So a good tip is to make sure that you focus on the cups, the point that you're pouring and touching them together. Don't look down into the soap mould, because then you lose focus on what your hands are doing. And then as you've finished your pour, just give your mould a little tilt to make sure you're covering the whole surface. Be quite gentle because you don't want to disturb it and muddy up the design too much. Okay, so if we have a look at this layer, I actually think, even though I had a very light trace, I think my trace was actually still a little bit too light because the lines are not as distinct as I would like them to be. So in my next pour, I'm going to let my trace get a tiny bit thicker. Okay, so on to layer 2. Now, if you wanted to do a kiss pour, you don't have to do lots of layers. You could just do one single kiss pour into a mould. The thing that I really enjoyed with doing this in 5 layers is it was a technique that I hadn't done before, and so therefore it gave me 5 goes at looking at the technique, finding how it behaved, what happened when you did different things. So I found it was really good to actually do those layers. Now I've waited until my first layer is nicely set up before I've mixed this other batch up, because I don't obviously want to ruin that layer by pouring on top of it and sinking through to that layer. I've mixed up another batch of soap and some more colours. I've gone for different colours this time than I had last time. And I'm just using those paper cups again. These are the same ones, I've just wiped them out. Now what I'm doing here is I'm pouring differently into these cups. I'm putting the layers in, sort of, you know how you'd pour like a thin line design, that sort of thing. So just literally taking my colours and gently pouring them down the side of my cup so I get these little pools of colour. Okay, so for this cup I'm alternating this teal, gold and white colour, and I'll leave the other colours for the other cup. So into my second cup I'm going to pour this magenta type colour, the purple and the white. And I do think it is worth doing different colour schemes in the 2 different pouring cups or jugs or whatever it is that you're using. Because remember, what's going to happen is you're going to pour these out of these containers and they're going to flow together as they kiss into the mould. And if you've used the same colours in each cup, then you're not really going to see that nice feathering where those 2 cups intermingle, because if you pour gold and gold, it's just going to look like a big blob of gold. Now I'm not sure how well you can see this here, but can you see that I've allowed my trace to get a little bit thicker? It's still a thin trace, but it is just a slightly thicker trace than I had for that first pour. And then I'm hoping to get a little bit more definition in those feathers this time. Okay, so let's bring our mould back in. Now how do you tell if it's set up enough without prodding it and sticking a finger in it or something? Well, just have a look at the top of your soap. Once it's lost its sheen, then that typically means it's nice and set up. If it's still all shiny, it's likely to be too soft. Okay, so here we go with our pour again. And yes, you can really see, can't you, that my batter is quite a bit thicker than last time, but it's still flowing really nicely. The other thing that I'm making sure of is that I'm pouring quite slowly. What I want to happen is I want those 2 streams of batter to touch and kiss on their way down, but I want them to sort of get a wiggly sort of jagged effect, and that happens when you pour a little bit slower. If you pour really fast, then it just pushes those lines out very quickly. Okay, so once again we need to just tilt that mould up and spread that batter around. And I do think my lines are more defined here, and I've definitely got lots of nice feathers going on. And I'm just tilting that really gently and carefully because I don't want to muddy things up. What don't I like about this layer? I'm not keen on where the pour finished. With the thicker batter, it's made that sort of little blobby area in the middle. Now this is a common thing that happens when you pour soap with this technique, and in the Challenge Club it was actually allowed, if you wanted to take a little stick, a bamboo skewer or something, and just swirl that very centre bit to finish the design off. Okay, onto our third layer, and as you can see I've filled my cups the same as I did last time, but with different colours. My previous layer is nice and set up. What I'm going to do this time is a travelling kiss pour, so I'm going to move the cups around. The other change that I've made is that I've put more batter in my cups. The reason I've done that is because I want to stop the pour before I get to those horrible dreggy thick bits at the bottom of the cup. I want it to still be flowing as I stop. If you're still pouring and you're trying to get those last little bits out of the cup, you lose the momentum of the pour, and that's when you get those funny blobby end bits. Now I really like this travelling pour. The one criticism I've got of what I did is that I didn't really plan the travel route very well, and as you can see I had to stop and then start again in this extra corner and then sort of go over a bit that I'd already done. So I think if I did this again, and I do like the effect of the travelling pour, I think I would sort of zigzag my way across in a much more sort of systematic fashion, or maybe even do sort of like a spiral or something going round. But yeah, that travelling pour, lots of feathering and really quite dramatic, and the extra batter I was very pleased with because it stopped me getting that blobby end bit that I didn't like. Okay, so if you're keeping count, we're up to layer 4 now. And as you can see here, I've gone back to that first way that I filled the cups with the two colours just poured down the sides. To be honest, I didn't really notice much of a difference in how filling the cups really affected the pour. One thing I would say is try not to put too many small bits of colour down, because you do want some decent blocks of colour to let this feathering show properly. Now what I have done with this, as you can see, is I've actually added a little bit of white after I'd filled the cups up right to the centre of those little cups. I'm hoping that it will create some extra accent colour and give me a little bit more of a feather. Now I'm going to try my pour from the corner here, so I can let the pour just spread out all across the mould rather than doing it from the centre. Hey, I've got 5 goes, so I might as well try something different each time. So I've done the same as previously. I've put a bit of extra batter in so I don't have to get the dreggy bit out of the cups. And I'm just slowly pouring from the corner. But one thing I did notice is that I do get a little bit of the white helping split my feathers up, but most of it just sort of flowed out ahead of the other colours and has sort of pulled its way to the outsides. So I've ended up with a little bit of a sort of white border in this layer. And I guess that sort of makes sense because I put the white on the top of the cup, so it sort of was coming out first. But overall, I really love that one. That's definitely my favourite so far. So I'm going to finish my 5th layer off with that, but getting rid of that white edge. Okay, so on to the last layer now, and by doing these 4 previous layers I've learnt an awful lot. I know the design I like best from the corner. I know the right sort of batter thickness that I want, and I know how to stop getting that horrible little blobby bit that you get at the end. So it's been really good to have a practice with those other layers. So let's just finish this off with pouring from the edge, and then we'll be done. So I wrapped my soap up really well with some cling wrap to seal it up, and I popped it as normal, and I left it wrapped for a full 2 days. So even though it could have been cut after 1 day, I left it for longer because I wanted to stop as much soda ash as possible from getting on the soap. And as you can see here, there is very, very little, if any, soda ash on this. Now I'm quite excited to see those sides. Oh God, look at those. They look really great. I'm so pleased. I know some people would think, oh, it's a shame to cover up all the other layers as you poured each of those layers. But I think the effect is great. The sides look really good. I'm really pleased with those. And then as you use the soap, each of those layers is going to be revealed and the bar will change as it gets worn out. So let's have a look at some individual bars that we've got, and I really do like the sides on those bars. They just look really dramatic. You may have noticed there that the base is sort of quite plain, as it were. That's just the way that the pour fell. I could plane the bottom of that off, but I'm not going to. I think it's unnecessary and it's just a waste of soap. And as the soap gets used, that will start to reveal some patterns. I do really love the sides on these. I think just doing those layers added a real different effect to the soaps. And it's also quite amazing how dramatically different each bar is because of the way the pour happens and the way the different colours flow around the mould. And then this one from the middle is my favourite. Are you allowed to have favourites? I think you are. So overall, I do really like this pour. It's actually not a pour that takes a huge amount of time, especially if you just do one single pour. But I do love the effect that the layers made. Those sides are just brilliant. And the idea that as you use the soap, it will change as it wears out. And then lastly, here are some pictures of the final soaps. I beveled the edges of them very lightly, but I didn't plane the surfaces at all. Because I poured a nice thin trace, my surfaces were lovely and flat, and because I kept them tightly sealed, I got really no soda ash on them at all. I must admit, I do really love these soaps and I love this technique. I'm definitely going to do it quite a bit more. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you like the soaps. If you do, it would be great if you gave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, then why not subscribe to my channel? And if you've got any questions or comments, then please leave them below in the comments section and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!